Yep.
Appreciate you guys showing up Wednesday night, world famous late night at the Lege. You know, every week you guys are consistently showing up in a way, and I truly appreciate the the time that you put into watching this, right? And the reason why I'm doing this is because I believe that people who are most directly impacted by the American criminal legal systems are the one closest to the solution. Now, I didn't come up with that. That was one of the folks that really got me involved in advocacy. He started an organization called Justice Leadership, Glenn Martin. You know, he's often quoted in saying that. And when I got introduced to advocacy work, I came into an organization, as I said, called Just Leadership USA, JLUSA.org. And it was an organization that was focused on leaders around the country coming together and really undergirding their network and making sure that they had access to national resources. And one of the projects that was happening was close Rikers. So you got to remember, I'm coming from Texas, and our jail system in Texas is completely different than the jail system in New York. So I didn't understand how pervasive the issue of Rikers was. And I didn't understand, you know, Khalif Browder gave us an idea, and he may have seen Solitary, but you know, the human gristmill, as Glenn Martin would say, is what Rikers is. And I remember back in 2017, we were supposed to have been closing Rikers, like that was it. But in 2022, Mayor Eric Adams ran on a platform of closing Rikers. So tonight we're going to speak with one of the folks who was involved at the very beginning of that advocacy road with Close Rikers, one of the leaders, somebody that I haven't spent enough time with, but we're going to, so I'll watch out. His name is Darren Mack, and I get him to come on camera. Darren Mack is one of the folks that I met at Just Leadership. He is one of the folks who I think at some point, you know, was one of the folks that was really not only involved in the advocacy, but I think he actually worked there as well. So I'm gonna shut up and give my man Darren the floor. How are you doing?
I'm good, Louis. Thank you so much for having me today.
So tell us about yourself. What are you doing? And what and we're going to talk about why you're here specifically, but give some folks some background on how we know each other and your body of work.
Yeah, so a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Brooklyn, Brooklynite, Brooklyn, New York. From the old Bushwick. I always say old Bushwick because it's changed dramatically from the time when I was growing up. You know, Bushwick, like many other communities of color, like Bronzeville, like Harlem, like the South Bronx, was basically impacted by issues of high unemployment amongst black and brown folks. There was a hyper criminalized and hyper policed, so therefore contribute to the hyper incarceration of folks. And historically under resourced. Our community basically were historically under resourced, except for when it came to like the carceral system, meaning police and jails and prison. So at the age of 17, I was arrested, incarcerated, and charged as an adult and sent to Rikers Island when the population was over 20,000 people detained there. And, ultimately, I, was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison for being accessory to a robbery. But during my incarceration, I had an opportunity to, you know, get engaged, be a part of a college program called the Bar Prison Initiative. This was during the time when basically the crime bill, the '94 crime bill, decimated college and prisons across the country, and especially in New York. And there were basically practically no, higher education programs in New York State. When I entered into the system, so I got into the program, and then it basically, it was probably a catalyst for me in wanting to get engaged in advocacy and organizing around the carceral system, and tackling mass incarceration and the new Jim Crow system as well. So, you know, also, so basically, like, I came home, got after serving, 20 years in the system, came home in 2012, graduated at, on Bard College in 2013. And then, 2015, basically, there was, Justice USA had launched like a few months before I became a member. I became a member in 2015, and that same year, Khalif Brado, was telling his story, and it was all over the news, about the impact that with how Rikers Island impacted him, and ultimately after some time, he took his own life, and that hit me hard.
Tell people who Khalif Browder was that might not know.
Yeah, Khalif Browder was a young man, 16 years old, who was arrested and falsely accused of stealing a $70 book bag. And he was sent to Rikers Island, and you know he's he was went through the dehumanization that every person on Rikers Island go through. And he had trouble with staff. He had trouble with some folks who were detained there as well, and which caused him to spend almost 2 years in solitary confinement. And going back and forth to court over these years, he, as he told his story himself, they the DA's prosecutors was saying, just plead guilty. The judge was like, just plead guilty and you could go home today. But he understood that he didn't do the crime, number one. And number two, if you just plead guilty and go home, he's gonna have that felony for the rest of his life, which is, which basically in our society, he could be legally discriminated against, for so many things, for housing, for voting, from getting a license to do certain types of jobs, doing certain types of work. He could be legally discriminated. So he refused to plead guilty to something that he didn't do. And after 3 years, they just say, okay, you can go home now. He just dropped the case and let him go home. And that trauma that he went through, he spoke about it, and it was like they couldn't believe that what happened to this young man. And he spoke about it on different, media platforms, and people was like, how could a system do something to a person like this? And how many more people is this system doing to? And unfortunately, he took his life, and because of the trauma he'd been through.
And so how did that encourage you? Like what did that do for your advocacy?
It made me angry as hell. It made me angry because, here it is. We're supposed to have a so-called justice system. It was basically the last straw for me. It was a sign that there wasn't no justice in the system. It was just a criminal system, and that's why I call it a criminal legal system. And because there's no justice, especially for Black and brown folks like myself, and for the system to do something like that to him, especially like Rikers Island, and I've been on Rikers Island for 19 months. When the population was 20,000, and then to hear this when I come home that's even worse than it was before, it made me angry. And Akeem Browder, who's the brother of Khalif Browder, he organized the call, for the closure of Rikers Island. And then the following year, Justice USA, who was led by Glenn Martin, who also experienced Rikers Island, launched the campaign to close Rikers. And I got, and all of us got directly involved with that movement.
So let's feed into that, because the people I bring on the show are experts. I consider folks who are directly impacted. You are one of the few experts in organizing that I've had the chance to bring on the show. So through the eyes of an organizer, how important was it that you were closing the institution that you spent 19 months in?
Yeah, it was personal, because people for decades, have been dying on Rikers Island, for issues like medical and neglect. People have been like taking their own lives. on Rikers Island because of the inhumane conditions. So Rikers Island has always been a crisis. Even like in the crisis, since the pandemic, the crisis has exacerbated so much so that last year, 16 people within the New York City Department of Corrections had um, lives were taken. Their lives were lost. Some, because of medical neglect. Some had took their own lives because of inhumane conditions. So just knowing about that, that and hearing about it and witnessing the brutality, because at that time, Rikers wasn't in the limelight like it is today. At that time, Rikers Island was, and when I was on it, it was out of sight, out of mind. Rikers Island is basically the last penal colony in the United States. So folks probably heard of Alcatraz, that closed decades ago, which was famous, closed decades ago. McDare Island, which was a penal colony, in the U.S. that closed like in the early 2000s. And when that closed, that left Rikers Island to be the last penal colony in the United States. And it was out of sight, out of mind. And there were efforts in the past, from system stakeholders, top-down efforts, people like Herb Sturz, who was one of the co-founders of the Vera Institute. He was.
Oh, now wait. You said penal colony. I'm not gonna let that just ride by, because people think that slavery was only in the South, and like they don't. So, what is the history of Rikers Island?
Yeah, so the history of Rikers Island, it was originally owned by, the Riker family, specifically Richard Riker, who was, I believe, a municipal judge in New York. And, there's a book actually about him. There's not a book about him specifically, but there's like historical writings about Richard Riker and his role in what's called the Kidnapping Club. So, during, the early, I believe, like the early mid 1800s, when there was like fugitive slave laws, like if a slave like went from a slave state to a free state, these fugitive slave laws, kidnappers, people could kidnap them and take them back into those slave states. So Richard Riker, he was part of this kidnappers club where you have these bounty hunters who would go into free states and kidnap free black men, women, and children, take them to his Richard Riker court, and then he would send them back into slavery, free people, and they would give him money under the table for cutting that deal.
So 12 years a slave in real life.
12 years a slave in real life. It's documented. Eric Foner, who's a historian in New York City at Columbia University, documented it. And I think his name is Gene Down. He has a book about the Kidnapping Club that came out last year.
So where in the South they were being rounded up if they escaped the plantation, in the North they were actually being kidnapped.
Yes.
So these were free black men, and Rikers Island was part of the property that was owned by this individual. So what's the tie-in between slavery and the prison system there?
So Richard Riker basically sold Rikers Island to the city, and basically, there was a system that was like really horrible at the time, and then they utilized Rikers Island, the Rikers Island, to build what we know today as Rikers Island. So black men in captivity, in a penal system, it's just like how it was during the plantations, basically.
So I thought we were supposed to have already closed it. I thought they closed it in 2018, 2019, but obviously it's still open.
Yeah. So in 2016, when the campaign launched, we was pushing and pulling the mayor to close Rikers Island. He was like, basically over the time he was saying, we're going to change Rikers Island, we're going to fix Rikers Island, we're going to reform Rikers Island. And we understood that Rikers Island can't be fixed. Rikers Island can't be reformed, and it can't be changed. The only solution for Rikers Island was closure. So after a year of pushing and pulling and advocacy and organizing and changing the hearts and minds of New Yorkers, New Yorkers came to a conclusion that Rikers Island needed to be closed, and that was the only solution. So 2017, the mayor made the commitment. He said, okay, we're going to close Rikers Island. then what happens next? Okay, how do we close Rikers Island? And that's where the complexity comes in. So there was different things like decarceration needs to happen. So the plan, so we fought. And then what about, okay, we close Rikers Island. Where do people going to go if they get incarcerated? So Rikers Island is a jail complex. It's not a prison. It's not one jail. Some people think it's one jail. There are 10 jails on Rikers Island. 400 acres of space, of basically land. And so when during like in the middle of the closed Rikers movement in 2016, there were plans to actually build another jail on Rikers Island. But, because it was about, I think they had set aside like almost I forgot exactly how much it was, but money was already set aside to construct another facility on Rikers Island. But because
they were going to build those community jails too, right?
No, this is way before this idea.
Got you. Okay.
So there was a plan so there was going to be 11 jails on Rikers Island. So it's 400. They could build 20 jails on Rikers Island. It's 400 acres. That's how much space it is. So they could have 200,000 or more people locked up in Rikers Island. So when the movement took off, that put a lot of pressure and put a spotlight on Rikers Island. So that was halted and that was stopped. The building of another jail on Rikers Island. So basically, we was like, okay, if we close Rikers Island, where are people going to go? And we have borough facilities like all across the country. The jail is next to the court. New York is different because we have Rikers Island, the last penal colony, with 10 jails on there, and we still have a facility in each borough, specifically, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Staten Island, and the Bronx. So we said, okay, we know that if as long as we have police, people are going to get arrested, and if people get arrested, they're going to get incarcerated. And at this moment, if we close Rikers Island, they're going to be incarcerated in these borough facilities that exist now, like in Brooklyn House, like the Tombs in Manhattan, like the boat in the Bronx. So those facilities are decrepit and old as well too. It's falling apart. Like every summer for years, the Jails Action Coalition, the advocates and organizing be protesting in front of Brooklyn House because people who are detained there sending out complaints about the heat because there's no air conditioning in there. Walls are sweating, etc. Every winter, people are protesting in front of the Brooklyn House facility because it's the inadequate heating system. And
what's the solution?
So our members, people who experience Rikers Island, people who survive Rikers Island, and their family members, basically said we need to address conditions of confinement as well. We need to address the conditions of confinement. And so the solution was to replace the facilities that's in the boroughs, demolish the Brooklyn facility and replace it with a facility that has the heating, that has the air conditioning, etc. To demolish the Tombs facility so they could have the heating, have the facility, have more space, have more natural light, etc. So to demolish all 4 facilities in the current boroughs in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, and then close the boat and have a facility next to the court in the Bronx. So, and then shut down the rest of the facilities on Rikers Island. So going from 14 jails across the city down to just 4. Going from 14, it's over 14,000 beds in the whole system to a maximum of 3,300 beds.
So what do you say to those folks, who say, but that's really not abolition? You're really still not dealing with the root issue that people are incarcerated versus those folks who are saying, at least they're not in the same conditions that they were in.
Yeah. So we're not going to get to abolition by 2027. This plan is set to reduce the incarceration footprint by 75% by 2027. And we're working to get it done faster, going from 14,000 beds to 3,300 beds maximum. And so that's the first phase of the work. The other part of the work is to redistribute the by closing Rikers Island. There's going to be over $1.8 billion saved every year from closing Rikers Island. And that money we want to be redistributed into the community that's been mostly impacted by Rikers Island, like the South Bronx, like Harlem, like Bronzeville, Brooklyn, South Jamaica, Queens. We want those dollars to go into those communities that have been historically under-resourced to address the root causes of incarceration, So that's part
particularly in Brooklyn, right? I mean, like when you look at how historically Brooklyn has been under-resourced but yet exploited, it just makes sense for there to be a concerted effort to make sure that there's opportunities for employment and education, because those feel like the root causes of what leads folks into prison or jail.
Definitely. Like there was a study that was done by incarcerated men that was published like in late 70s, early 80s. And they found out that over 75% of New York State's prison population came from 7 New York City neighborhoods. South Bronx, Harlem, Lower East Side, Bronzeville, Brooklyn, Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, and South Jamaica, Queens. Those are the same communities that our members, and their family members come from. Those are the same communities that's been historically under-resourced. Those are the
still.
Yeah, it's still, if you think about it, once I named them, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That 75% of New York State prison population come from those communities. And those are the communities that's been, criminalized and incarcerated on Rikers Island. So we want the money that's saved from closing Rikers Island and the boat to go into these communities, into those things that you mentioned, like education, like affordable housing, like those health help building up health institutions and credible messages, etc. So that's part of the plan. Decarceration, divesting from the system to reinvest in the communities, and defending the rights of incarcerated people by addressing conditions of confinement, and that's the first phase. And once we get there, then we work towards zero incarceration.
That's what I'm talking about. So now the reason why we showed up here tonight, because y'all got something cooking. Y'all got something planned for the end of Black History Month. Now, I don't know why they give us the shortest month of the year, but that's okay. We'll talk about that on another episode. But tell me, because, the great segue is decarceration and making sure that folks have access to freedom. Tell me about this thing y'all got going on with this Freedom Bus.
Oh, yeah. So this is basically led by the Color of Change and the Black attorneys of legal aid, and they invited us to part of Freedom Agenda, which is the organization that I co-founded and is a co-director of.
Tell us about Freedom. You just can't name off these organizations. Like talk about these organizations. Start off with Freedom Agenda.
Yeah, so Freedom Agenda is a member-led organization that's dedicated to organizing directly impacted people to achieve decarceration and system transformation. So, we basically are leading the work to close Rikers Island. We also, collaborated with environmental justice organizations across the city to pass legislation, the Renewable Rikers Act legislation, and to have, once Rikers is closed, to create green sustainable energy on Rikers Island that will remove these peaker plants that's in communities of color that exhume toxicities into the atmosphere, and that's going to create green jobs as well. So that's the long term. Renewable Rikers is a long term work, but the immediate work is decarceration. Divesting from systems of punishment, specifically DOC, the Department of Corrections, which New York City has the highest Department of Correction budget in the country, but we get the worst results. We spend over $2 billion every year on the Department of Corrections in New York City. LA.
It's not just a subway where they hit us in the pocket, is it?
Yeah, LA has 3 times as many people detained in their system, and they operate on half of the budget than that New York does. The population, like I mentioned earlier, I was incarcerated on Rikers Island as a teenager when the population was over 20,000 people. Today, there's 5,500, and the budget hasn't budged.
Uh, so what's going on the 28th?
Yeah. So the 28th, Freedom Agenda have been invited to participate with Color of Change and the Black attorneys of legal aid to do a freedom ride. It's the last day of Black History Month. So in commemoration of Black History Month and in honor of the Freedom Riders, the Freedom Riders went from the north to the south where it was hot, what I'm saying? It was hectic and a lot of tension and dangerous. And we taking a bus to Brooklyn to the foot of the bridge of Rikers Island, which we call the Bridge of Pain, to call on the city and especially this administration that we need to decarcerate. We need releases, not Rikers. We need to free the people basically from the.
And that's happening when?
Excuse me.
When is that happening?
So that's happening February 28th. That's a Monday this month, and there's going to be a bus leaving from Brooklyn. I could probably if you go to there's a link.
We'll put the link in a description. It's get on a freedom bus.
Yeah.
The demand release for people at Rikers Island.
Yeah, 11 a.m. in Brooklyn. I forgot the exact location at the time, but folks can sign up and they'll get that information. And we'll be at the foot of the bridge of Rikers Island at 12 p.m. on Monday, February 28th.
Color of Change.
Color of Change, Black BALA, which is the Black Attorneys of Legal Aid, and Freedom Agenda.
And so, you talked about decarceration, but, right now, Omicron is a real situation. And we know that statistically, the deaths for people incarcerated is higher than the deaths that are the folks who are working. And so you mentioned that there were guard-ran fight clubs.
That's been going on for a very long time in jails and prisons throughout the country. The first time I heard about it was like years ago. But yeah, there's been news reports about fight clubs being,
on top of the COVID.
On top of the COVID, like right now, a lot the jails and facilities is locked down, and people not getting visits, people not getting to court. Actually, there was a hunger strike last month. About 200 incarcerated people on Rikers Island went on a hunger strike because they weren't getting their basic needs met. They weren't getting their mail. They weren't getting to the law library. They weren't getting their visitation. They weren't getting, commissary, basic need to the medical care, things like that. And although and they sent a strong message, and we got the message from the inside, and we held a demonstration and raised alarms. City elected officials and went in there to see what was going on, and then basically like we know what happens when incarcerated people organize, they single out the leaders, ship them there, and it's actually just recently there was a report that one of the leaders of the organizer on the inside was retaliated against. He was labeled as a snitch, and then let some unfortunately ignorant folks incarcerated, assaulted them. So so that's what's going on in there, and conditions still haven't really changed. It's still a crisis. It's still a human rights crisis.
And we don't want folks to forget that as we wrap up. How can people support Freedom Agenda?
Yeah, so get informed. I think folks should sign up to our newsletter. Sign up to our newsletter and get informed. We have a website. If you go to fa.urbanjustice.org, you'll go into our website and you'll find all about our work. The work that we're doing, is member-led, meaning, if a person has been impacted by incarceration or your family member has been impacted by incarceration, you can become a member of Freedom Agenda. And if you're a supporter and you believe in our goals and values, you can support us in various ways, like coming to actions, signing petitions, advocating to your elected officials about the crisis and urging them to do something. And you can follow us. And we just recently launched the campaign to close Rikers.org website, where you can find more information about the campaign specifically, and follow us on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Freedom Agenda NY.
And tell us your name and how to find you on social media.
So I'm Darren Mack, and you can find me on social media on Twitter or Instagram or at I am Darren Mack, on both those platforms.
Well, me and my wife are going to be there. I can't not have you on the show and talk about the event and not show up. So expect us to be there. We love Brooklyn. I think my wife gets a haircut in Brooklyn anyway. So funny thing, in prison, I thought had a record label called Freedom Riders. And when I came home from prison, that was going to be my claim to fame. So it's kind of ironic and kismet, if you will, that I'm talking about Freedom Riders in a real way. And I am inspired by the work that you have done and are doing. I'm a huge abolitionist, and I love the way that you put it, that we're not going to empty the prisons by 2027 or the jails, and taking a sensible approach towards it by taking 75% of that population and set them loose. Now, when you come back, because you'll come back, right, I hope, I want to talk about what the New York State legislator has done around bail.
Yeah.
And how folks are using that as an excuse to keep the jails open.
Yeah, to basically roll back, roll back a lot of reforms, but people are fighting back, bail, all criminal justice, reform, or, has been under attack all across the country. Anytime you pass some legislation to move forward, there's always people, opponents, who are organizing to undo it, or because systems of oppression, they morph, they change. We had slavery, and we fought against that, and then it changed into the convict leases system, and we fought against that, and it changed to Jim Crow. Then we fought against that, then it changed into mass incarceration, and we fighting against that, and then you have like mass incarceration and the new Jim Crow. So those are like two pieces of oppressive system that we're fighting against. So the fight continues, and I'm happy to be a part of it in this generation.
And as I hear you talk, I see the connective tissue of capitalism, right? Because all of those systems have been rooted in exploiting, brown and black bodies for profit. And in this age where capitalism isn't going anywhere, and we're trying to figure out how to lessen the impact on Black and brown communities, we really have to build a different economic model that isn't built on that slavery system, or that system of, using the folks at the bottom to undergird the folks at the top. Yeah. And we're going to have you back and talk more about incarceration. Get on the Freedom Bus Monday, February 28th at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. Is that on the Brooklyn side, right?
Yeah, so Rikers Island is in Queens, and so at 12 p.m., at the foot of the bridge of Rikers Island is where the actions are going to happen, and the bus is going to be you can in at 11 a.m. in Brooklyn.
I'm gonna probably have to take the train. I ain't gonna be able to park in Brooklyn, so.
Yeah, I try to see if I can pull up exactly the location.
I'm gonna put the link in a description.
Yeah.
So folks have access to it.
Yeah. I'm not really seeing.
I saw there's a link that goes to the sign up of the actual event, and there's a Bala.
Yeah, if you sign
Rikers release rally.
Yeah, if you sign up, you'll get the information in regards to like the location of the bus. So we want folks to sign up, RSVP, so we can know like how many buses we need, and the more the merrier. Share with your friends. This is a 2022 Freedom Ride,
Yeah, we want folks to show up. Definitely, the more people to show up, the better. And of course, the only way for people to build power is for us to build power together. Thank you so much, Darren, for joining us. We will have you back. And, you know, without your work, folks wouldn't have.
I'm not alone. I couldn't do this alone. Trust me.
I appreciate you, man. Appreciate you guys showing up Wednesday night, late night at the Ledge. We're doing this every Wednesday night, 10 p.m. live sometimes. If not, we're gonna, you know, at least broadcast it. But we appreciate y'all showing up. We're gonna have our man Darren Mack back. Y'all make sure to go find him as well. Color of Change. Shout out to Bala. And of course, we want to give a huge shout out to Equally Yoked Marketing and Consultants for making this possible. All right, y'all.